Well, welcome back, you beautiful people, to our podcast, United Taste of America, from our friends at iHeart. I am Rick K. Jones, your guide to some of the best foods across our great nation. And today we're in the 19th state of the Union, Indiana, the Hoosier State. Wow, what a year to talk about Indiana, huh? They won the national championship this year in college football. After 100 years of being the worst football program in the country, they go undefeated and win the national championship. But when you think about Indiana, you usually think about what? That other sport, basketball. Have spent a lot of time in the state of Indiana because of my days as a basketball coach. I started my career as a basketball coach, and we would play a lot of schools in Indiana: Rose-Hulman, DePaul, Wabash, a lot of small schools from the state of Indiana. And then later, I worked in college basketball with the National Association of Basketball Coaches, and the NCAA is headquartered in Indianapolis. So I've spent a lot of years in Indianapolis and throughout the state of Indiana. I grew up a John Wooden fan, the great coach from UCLA. Well, he's an Indiana farm boy that went to Purdue, played for Piggy Lambert, was an All-American, a basketball player. He's one of very few people that are in the Basketball Hall of Fame, both as a player and as a coach. Very, very few. Lenny Wilkins is another one that is. But loved Coach Wooden, had spent a lot of time with Coach Wooden in my early days as a coach. I'll tell a great story that he was late in his life. He was in his 90s. He was living out in Los Angeles in a little apartment, and my daughter was living in Los Angeles at the time. And I called Jennifer, and I said, Jennifer, I'm going to overnight you 4 what we call panel balls, basketballs that have places where you can sign autographs. They're like the panels or the white part that you would sign. And I said, I'm going to send you 4 basketballs, and you're going to go over to Coach Wooden's apartment. He's expecting you, and he's going to sign those balls for me. Then you're going to ship them back to me. Well, she got there like at 10:30 in the morning, and I think stayed 8 hours. He made her a peanut butter sandwich for lunch. They visited and talked about life all day. She sent me a wonderful picture of her and Coach Wooden. She said it was one of the great days of her life, and he was just an icon in Indiana. I also grew up as a Bob Knight fan. I loved Coach Knight. I got to know Coach Knight. I got to have great respect for Coach Knight, and just loved Indiana basketball. A few years ago, Charlotte and I had the chance to go to the college football playoff national championship game where Georgia beat Alabama in Indianapolis. But that week, we did what we called the Jimmy Chitwood tour of Indiana basketball. We went to on Friday night, we went to a game at Butler at the famous Hinkle Fieldhouse where Hoosiers were set. On Sunday, we went to Indiana University and saw a game. On Wednesday, we went to Notre Dame and saw a game. And on Friday, we went to Purdue and saw a game at Mackey. So and in between, we drove to Milan to just see the gem of the famous Milan championship team from the 1950s. And so I've spent a lot of time in Indiana. It's, like I said, great people, one of my favorite states. Now, so many states in the United States were named for Native American words. We just called Indiana for Indians because there were so many native tribes that were from that area. And so they called the territory for Indians, Indiana, for the natives that settled there. Like so many other Midwestern states, who were the first Europeans? It was the French trappers that were traveling by river. And they later ceded the territory, though, back to the British after the French and Indians War. And it became a territory until 1816, when it became our 19th state. Indiana was a state, as they were settled, that did a lot of things right. They really designed the state for settlement, and they did it by building lots of roads, lots of canals, lots of railroads. And Indiana, really, outside of Indianapolis, is a state of small towns revolving around farming communities. But they built great infrastructure. The other thing they invested in early on as a state was public education. And they have some of the finest public schools in all of our country, and it goes back decades and decades and decades. Like I said, it's a state of farming communities and small towns. They also sent a lot of troops to fight during the Civil War. They were, I think, the fourth largest state in terms of the number of troops that were sent to fight the Civil War. Indiana was settled by so many immigrants because it was farming country and land was relatively inexpensive. And so Eastern Europeans, Germans, Swedes, Scandinavians, lots of people migrated to Indiana. A number of Southern planters after the Civil War came to Southern Indiana to grow crops. A lot of people came from New York and New England and settled. So it was kind of a really interesting melting pot. And there's a demeanor about people in Indiana. I find that people that live there to be some of the most friendly people on the planet. And I think it comes from kind of this melting pot of different cultures that came, and they all had to work together to grow the state and do some things. Today, it's a combination of agribusiness. They still grow corn, wheat, hay, soybeans. They grow a lot of tomatoes in Indiana, and it's married with manufacturing and service industries. Eli Lilly, the famous drug company, is headquartered in Indianapolis. Subaru has their only plant in the United States in Indiana and northern Indiana. And then there's a lot. I mean, you think about farming, but you get up to the Great Lakes, places like Gary, Indiana, along Lake Michigan. It's famous there for things like manufacturing and oil and steel plants and those types of things. Indianapolis and Indiana is famous for the Indiana Motor Speedway and the famous Indianapolis 500 motor race that's run every Memorial Day and has been, as we mentioned again, known for great college sports, high school, college, professional basketball. It's ironic. The Indiana football team this year went 16-0. No team had gone 16-0 since I think Yale did in like 1890 or something. And the last basketball team to go undefeated was the 1976 Indiana basketball team that went undefeated in college basketball, coached by the legendary Bob Knight. So fascinating state of a big, big city in Indianapolis and a whole lot of little small towns. If you remember the famous movie Hoosiers, it was really based on on a teeny little high school that won the state championship back in the 1950s, early 1950s. I think it was 1952 from Milan High School. But it was a great story of a small town. In this case, it was called Hickory. And part of what I like about it is, the characters are constantly going to small diners and other places to eat. Indiana, is really famous for a lot of the small town foods. They're really famous for their desserts. It's the home of sugar cream pie. They grow persimmons in southern Indiana, and they're famous for their persimmon pudding. How about the Dutch baby pancakes? That comes from the German influence of Dutch baby, which is a kind of a hollow pancake that in many cases has fruit filling and puts powdered sugar on top. They're famous for their apple butter. Again, that comes from a lot of the German influence of those there. Indiana is famous for chicken and waffles, for fried catfish, for Hoosier chili. Hoosier chili, unlike Cincinnati chili, is not made with spaghetti, but it's made with elbow macaroni. and it's eaten not with a spoon, but with a fork because you can get it. They are also famous for a dish called a beef Manhattan. It's an open-faced sandwich of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and gravy. Great diner dish in Indiana. What else do they make and grow a lot and make a lot? Popcorn. Indiana's very famous for popcorn. You've heard of Orville Redenbacher? He's from Indiana. How about Weaver and Pop Weaver brands? Those all come from the great state of Indiana, where they grow a lot of popcorn to make popcorn. They grow a lot of Indian corn, and Indian corn can make wonderful popcorn. But what is the most famous dish in all of Indiana? It would have to be the Hoosier breaded and fried pork tenderloin sandwich. Lots, again, of German immigrants that came. And remember, when you came from Germany, what were they famous for? They were famous for veal or beef schnitzels, Wiener Schnitzel, veal schnitzel. But in Indiana, there were more pigs than cows, and so they converted pork to making a form of a schnitzel, a pork schnitzel, because pork was plentiful and it was cheaper. And you go out throughout the entire state and you will find all these little diners and all these little burger joints that will serve you a pork tenderloin sandwich. The best I've ever eaten, and the one we feature in the series, is at Nick's Kitchen in Huntington, Indiana. Huntington, Indiana is a small town kind of in southeastern Indiana. It's the home of Dan Quayle. Remember Dan Quayle? He was the vice president of the United States under George H.W. Bush. He's from that little small town of Huntington, Indiana. Nick's Kitchen was opened by the son of a German immigrant named Nick Freienstein, first as a sandwich shop in downtown Huntington and then as a restaurant on North Jefferson Street in 1908. And he served hamburgers like so many other places did, but it was known for his version of the German staple, the Wiener Schnitzel, with pork instead of veal. Over the years, Nick's Kitchen has passed on to a few different owners, but it's remained open in the same location. They have a wonderful sign out front that's just, helium sign outside Nick's Kitchen on the street there on North Jefferson Street. And they continue to serve their famous pork tenderloin sandwich the same way that Nick made it back in the early 1900s. What they do is they buy whole pork loins. So they come to them whole. So they hand cut them, which I love. It's no fresher than a hand-cut pork loin. And then they take it and they put it through a machine that cubes it. And so and it cubes it itself, and then they run it back again. So they run it this way, and then they run it this way. So you get it cubed all the way. So it flattens it out, tenderizes it, cubes it, and then they batter it, and they soak it in buttermilk, and then they put it in a breading, and they fry it. And if you want an authentic version, this is the place to come. I had the chance to visit with the previous owner, who had gotten the business from her father, who had owned it. Her name is Jean Ann Bailey. She owned it for 20 years, and then who'd she sell it to? She sold it to her son, Mason. And Mason owns it, and he's the executive chef there. And again, they deliver those gigantic, and I mean gigantic, pork tenderloins from big pigs. And then he hand cuts each one every day and processes those. And it was really a joy to watch him work. When you watch our vignette, you'll see me in the kitchen with Mason and watch how he makes this incredible sandwich. When it comes out on a bun, the bun's about this big around and the tenderloin's about this big. So it's hanging out of all sides. It is like ridiculous good. You got to watch our interview and the vignette on the iHeart YouTube channel. Again, Mason still does it the old-fashioned way. Hand cuts the tenderloins, puts them through the machine, tenderizes them, hand breads them in breadcrumbs. And what does he fry them in? Lard, of course. You got to have pig fat to make pig really, really good, and it's really, really good. Again, it's the biggest sandwich you've ever seen. It's one of the great, delicious dishes. It's one of the great, iconic American dishes. Nick's Kitchen, Huntington, Indiana, pork tenderloin sandwich. So where else should you eat in Indiana? Well, here are my three from me. There's a very famous steakhouse in downtown Indianapolis that anybody has eaten. It's called St. Elmo's. It is one of the great American steakhouses. But what you want to start with is the best shrimp cocktail in all of America. Shrimp flown in from the Gulf, big, juicy, plump, white shrimp, served in a horseradish sauce that will fry your brain. It's got so much horseradish in it, you'll just light up and you'll go, oh my God, I can't possibly eat this. Oh, yes, you can. You'll order 2 or 3 orders of the shrimp cocktail at St. Elmo's because this fresh shrimp and the fresh horseradish sauce is so, so good. During COVID, you remember they canceled March Madness. And the next year, we played college basketball in 2021, largely in empty arenas. We still didn't know about COVID. We didn't know how it was spreading, but we knew we had to play college basketball that year. And that year, instead of playing March Madness all over the country, they brought all of the 68 teams to Indianapolis, and they put them in a bubble, and they played the games and lead up, and then they ended up playing the Final Four there in the arena in Lucas Oil. And one of the things we laughed about was they would have cut out people, cardboard people, in the stands. They gave the cardboard people better seats than they gave the real people. But Ryan and I were fortunate enough to go. We were working with Warner Ladder, which is the ladder of cutting down the nets in March Madness. I want to tell you 2 stories about that trip. The first one is I flew from Atlanta, and I got to fly with Charles Barkley. And, he's a hoot. He's really fun to talk to and all this. And I did say, Charles, are you going to be able to go to St. Elmo's? And he goes, no, we're not allowed to get out of the bubble. In fact, when I get off the plane, I go downstairs to baggage claim. They're going to push me in a limo and take me to the hotel, and I can never leave. Well, I found out later on, St. Elmo's would send them food. They were sending them the shrimp cocktail and great steaks, and that was really cool. Tell one more story about that trip. The Final Four that weekend was Easter weekend. So the semifinals were on Saturday, and the finals were on the day after Easter. And that morning, we took the ladder around Indianapolis, Ryan and I did, to all the stops for a television show. They wanted us to go in front of the fountain. They wanted us to go in front of Lucas Oil. They wanted us to go in front of the NCAA. So we moved it around all morning. But it's Easter Sunday. And I said to Ryan, we need to go to church. And so we found a Methodist church that was kind of near our hotel. And so we go to Easter services there, and we're sitting in the back of the church. And well, it turned out this was the first service the church had been open since COVID. So it was they'd been closed since, for a year for COVID. And so we're in the back of the church, and of course the minister comes by because he doesn't recognize us and says, introduces himself. We tell him while we're there. It turns out he had gone to divinity school at Duke, and Duke was actually playing in Indianapolis, and he, had won championships in Indianapolis and was a big fan. And so anyway, we told him what we did. We brought the ladder around. So he gets up to preach Easter services. And he says, before I preach my sermon today, I want you to know the guys that carry the Warner ladder around that are used to cut down the nets are here, and they had the ladder with them. And after the services, if you want to go out in the parking lot, you can get your picture taken with the ladder, which almost everybody in the congregation did, which shows how everybody's such a great fan of basketball. The next restaurant is in West Lafayette, home of Purdue University, and it is the Triple X Drive-In, opened in 1929. They make their own root beer. They make their own brand of root beer that they'll sell at this great drive-in diner restaurant. Great burgers, fries, shakes, breakfast, obviously, anytime. Again, I can't tell you how many thousands of Purdue students have eaten at the Triple X. It is so good. You just belly up to the counter and you eat till it ouches. It is so good. The Triple X Drive-In in West Lafayette. And finally, there's a Jewish deli in downtown Indianapolis called Shapiro's that will rival any deli in New York or anywhere else. Shapiro's. Amazing corned beef, amazing Reuben sandwiches, great pastrami, great desserts, great dishes, great potato niches, all kinds of great Jewish deli food. Shapiro's Deli in Indy. St. Elmo's, Triple X in West Lafayette, and Shapiro's. That's by 3 from me. Like every week, we've got a great musical playlist. We've got a great song from a group from Gary, Indiana. You know them as the Jackson 5. They have a great song called Going Back to Indiana. When I was a kid, there was a cool song by Ardeen Taylor that you may be familiar with called Indiana Wants Me. Lord, I Can't Go Back There. And then we've got music from 3 iconic people from the state of Indiana. The first is the great John Mellencamp, and it's his classic song about Indiana called Small Town. And then there are 2 amazing songwriters that came from the state of Indiana. The first is the great Hoagy Carmichael. He wrote one of my favorite songs of all time, Georgia on My Mind. But what he's mostly known for is the classic song Stardust. And we have the version sung by the great Willie Nelson. And finally, maybe the greatest songwriter in the history of American popular music, the great Cole Porter, is from Indiana. And we've got his classic song, Anything Goes, sung by the great Sutton Foster. So that's the culinary delicacies of Indiana with the pork tenderloin sandwich at Nick's Kitchen leading the way. We're going to see you next week on United Taste of America from state number 20. That state is the great state of Mississippi. We'll see you then.